Tell me if you heard this before. Eastern Europe is corrupt, poor, and a bad place to live. If you haven't had a chance to visit recently, you probably believe this to be absolutely true. I've had a lot of contact with both Eastern and Western Europe, and I can say that I don't really agree. Not only is Eastern Europe doing a lot better than most people realize, in some important aspects, it's actually doing better than the West. Before I begin, keep in mind that both Eastern and Western Europe are diverse places. Not everything that I will say will be true for every individual country, but it will show an overall trend. Also, my goal is not to claim that everything is perfect, but things are changing, and in many ways they're changing quite fast. So here are three areas in which Eastern Europe is overall clearly in the lead. The first point, housing. For pretty much anyone watching this, I don't have to tell you how important it is. And as prices are going up everywhere, including Eastern Europe, it's more important than ever. Now, check out the list of countries by home ownership rate. This list shows the percentage of people that own the home they are living in. Eastern Europe dominates. 12 out of the top 25 countries are in Eastern Europe. Now, this is not a trivial thing like having a cheaper Big Mac. For almost all people, the real estate they own is the most expensive thing that they will have during their lifetime. A high home ownership rate also means that a larger part of the population doesn't have to spend a significant part of their salary paying out rent. And renting is tricky for one more reason. As the price of home rises, so does rent. So when half a city is renting, they're vulnerable to these rises. People in rich countries can see their pay rises be eaten up by the rising rent. And even if we ignore that aspect, still people feel more secure when they have a place that is their own. Plus, that's something that they can leave for their own children and grandchildren. Many people simply sell apartments of their grandparents and buy those that are suitable for them without paying out a mortgage. Now, some people are gonna rent either way. They're studying or working in a different town, maybe it's temporary, they're not ready to buy, and so on. But there is a major difference in that being 10, 15, 20% of your population and it being 35, 40, 45, and so on. Now, you might think that the buildings in Eastern Europe are sad, depressing, and of low quality. You know the stereotype. And sure, some of them can be. In some areas, there is still a lack of maintenance, and there are buildings of lower quality. But all of that is also true in the case of the West. And during this entire time, I will be showing you videos from Eastern Europe. My next point is equality. Now, Europe already is by far the most equal continent. Out of the top 10 countries with the lowest wealth inequality, 8 are European. Or here's another comparison. In the United States, the bottom 50%, or the poorer half of the country, take home only 10% of the income. In Europe, it's 22%, more than double. That's a staggering comparison. Although we should still be aiming for even more. Now, remember how I said that 8 out of the top 10 most equal countries are from Europe? Well, 6 of them are from Eastern Europe. And that includes the top 5. Housing and equality make the foundation for building one of the best regions on the planet. But something is missing: economic power. Eastern Europe is still poorer than the West. Look at the average wages. I have to point out that living in the East is a lot cheaper than living in the West. For example, €1,000 in Albania gets you a similar living standard to €3,000 in Germany. But even when we take that into account, the difference is a lot smaller, but it's still significant. And that brings us to my third point. I'm happy to say that it's exactly what's needed: economic progress. Most Eastern European economies are growing at an impressive speed, not only compared to the West, but compared to most other places on the planet. It varies by region, but overall, significant progress was made. With a few exceptions, the parts of Europe growing the fastest are exactly in the East. Check this out, these are almost China levels of growth. The thing with growing your economy is that even when you're doing it quite well, it still takes a lot of time. It took decades and decades for Western Europe to catch up to the United States. But when you have high levels of growth, at least you know that every year you're closing that gap. And in most of these countries, that's definitely happening. If stability can be kept, I truly think this could become one of the world's best regions to live. In time, and with a little bit of luck, maybe even similar to Scandinavia. And sadly, in recent years, Russia, Ukraine, and a few others are left behind. This is only made so much worse by the invasion. But I don't want to be pessimistic. I really hope that in the future they can find peace and stability. Just look at the Balkans. Due to the wars of the 90s, the region is behind countries like Poland or the Czech Republic. But in recent years, much of the Balkans is making amazing progress. For example, the average salary in Serbia almost doubled in the last 5 years, despite being hit with the pandemic. Of course, there are still issues, but most of the region is moving forward. Here's another example. As they wait for EU membership, Serbia, Macedonia, and Albania are negotiating creating a mini EU Schengen area, lifting borders and allowing their citizens, goods, and services to pass through freely, just like in the EU. And not so long ago, they were sworn enemies. There's no other way to describe this than, well, amazing. We usually see the negatives, the stereotype, but ignore the massive change that is happening. Keep in mind that this is not a full list. There are other things I could have mentioned, like low debt, high safety. And here's a surprising one. In many ways, Eastern Europe is actually more feminist than the West. Not everyone. I'm looking at you, Poland. And if I can make a personal observation, I think Eastern Europeans underestimate themselves. This is becoming less and less true, but many people still feel pessimistic. And at least from my experience, they usually have a view of the West in which there is no corruption and everyone is wealthy and happy. And compared to that, yes, Eastern Europe does still seem hopeless. But you know what? So would any place in the world, because that's not the real picture. I really think if you live in this part of the world, there are still many challenges, and maybe I will talk about them in future videos. But there are also so many things that you can feel optimistic and grateful about. I know this won't get me any subscribers, but keep in mind that I could be wrong. I always try to do my very best when researching these topics, but feel free to do your own research. And if you want to learn about another place that is making significant progress in a much harsher area, you can check out my video on the Great Green Wall of Africa and its amazing successes. Also, if you want to hear me talk mostly positive but with some criticism about a Western European country, here's a video I did on France, where I rank it in 5 categories. If you want to support a small YouTube channel, feel free to subscribe. I would really appreciate it. I hope you have an amazing day.